at Pat Boland's business past. And there's some rough moments, particularly tough times in the 80s when the economy, particularly for oil, was awful.
Well, when you start to look at the proposed partnership between Denver metropolitan taxpayers and the Broncos on a new stadium, one of the natural things is to look at the ownership of the team. In this case, Pat Boland and his family. It's generally regarded that Pat Boland is the owner of the Broncos, which is not accurate. The Broncos is actually owned by him, his two brothers, a sister, and his mother. But you start to look at his financial history and whether or not this is a solid partnership for taxpayers to get involved in. And what you find when you start to look at his financial history, one is a series of bankruptcies in 1989, 3 bankruptcies, and you also find a number of confidential settlements in lawsuits with former business partners both in the Broncos when he first became an owner and business partners in other non-football related ventures that he was involved in. And one of the interesting aspects of Mr. Boland's life is the way he maneuvers corporations and companies. And if you try to do the paperwork to find these companies, you run into a maze of paperwork because he does a lot of maneuvering with his corporations, and it's very difficult to nail down exactly his net worth, exactly the problems that he has been through. And to be fair to him, though, the Broncos have been very successful under his ownership, under the 13 years that he has been an owner. And there's no indication that the Broncos are in any financial risk. But you do start to ask the hard questions of, can he come up with the money to be a partner in this venture?
We have this common identity, Pat Boland and the Broncos. In fact, he owns about 30% personally.
That was the latest estimate, but there's, you can't say definitely that he owns 30%. He may own less, because of the way the court cases have gone and because of the way that is a private company, and so they are not obligated to say who owns what. We've asked him over the last couple of weeks to share with the public how much of the team he actually owns, how much of the team his sister owns, how much of the team his two brothers own, how much of the team his mother owns, and they have declined to be specific in the breakdown of the ownership.
Chris Lopez of the Denver Post. Let's continue our conversation about money, not in the same numbers. How about a little more than $5 a bushel? About 60 cents higher per bushel than last year, but unfortunately the crop this year just isn't what it should be, Debbie Frazier.
You can talk about gambling with the Broncos and the Nuggets. You can talk about gambling in Central City. The high rollers are out there on the plains, and they're rolling them out on corn and wheat. And what they're betting on is that the weather will be good. And in southeastern Colorado, it hasn't been good. They lost over 700,000 acres to drought. And these guys are such inveterate bettors. After the wheat crop died, they planted something else there thinking, it'll rain. It didn't rain. So some of them planted again, and they're still waiting for rain. All the harvesters, the combines, crossed the demarcation line of I-70 and headed north where they thought things were going to be better. In fact, they weren't, because there was a hailstorm, and that wiped out about $1 million worth of wheat. Now, I can't imagine a hailstorm occurring and suddenly finding my paychecks for the next 6 months all watermarked and unusable. But that's what they live with. Granted, some of them, they have crop insurance. There are some other things they can do. But to me, that's, gambling's a tough way to make a living.
Crop insurance for wheat doesn't cover the real costs.
No, they say that it costs about $120 per acre to grow wheat. And if you have a backyard vegetable garden and you think about what you put into it in terms of seed and planting and rototilling, you can see where that would add up if you were doing it in terms of acres. The crop insurance, depending on whether you got the 50% or the 60% or the 70%, doesn't really cover it. And it really doesn't cover it when wheat is going for $5.25 a bushel this year. Usually during harvest, wheat prices very calmly sink down into the basement. This year they've stayed up, so it's a double loss.
The winter wheat loss in Colorado was about 1/3. Over in Kansas, it was only down 5 or 8%. And now the spring wheat is really doing quite well.
The spring wheat is coming. Kansas actually lost 23% of its crop. It's a big wheat producer. That's its winter wheat. Its spring wheat may be better. Nationally, I think we lost both winter and spring wheat, about 4% of the crop.
Going from the drought of agriculture, stay with water for a moment. In the mountains of Colorado, the rivers have run well this year, and it's been wonderful for the commercial rafters.
Commercial rafters and private rafters. People, more and more people every year turn out to either take a raft trip or with their own little raft get on the water. There have been fatalities, many of them associated with the fact that people without wetsuits, without any kind of life jacket, are falling in water that's 42 degrees, and you have very few minutes to get out of that before hypothermia hits. And, you know, the people that were dressed properly and had flotation devices made it out, because a lot of people fall in the river.
Last year, 263,000 people went down the Arkansas River.
That's just the Arkansas.
Yes.
And you can count on that figure being doubled or maybe tripled if you take into account the other rivers in the state. Rafting compared to skiing or mountain climbing is fairly safe. The really hazardous activity these days is being at Chatfield or Cherry Creek, and you have all of the jet skis being driven around by people who do not certainly always have driver's licenses, and oftentimes are, shall we say, a bit impaired in their judgment.
You're very diplomatic. The risks involved for rafting and mountain climbing in Colorado last year, 10 lives each.
Correct.
And for skiing, 9 people. From hiking, 7.
7. You know, the 7 would come from those people who get lost and die of exposure, or those people sometimes who just slipped and fell. That's not a particularly high number for the state.
But with the growth of people, we can anticipate more and more people with a shortage of experience are going to go out and get injured or killed.
If you look at the figures for the last 5 or 10 years, they have gone up some, but it is in no way proportionate to the increases in the population. There is also some sort of an education system out there whereby people learn, if you're going to climb a 14er, bring warm clothes.
Debbie Frazier, State Desk, Rocky Mountain News. Let's go back to real estate editor John Rebchook. We're talking about the massive growth of building along the Front Range. There's lots of business news. Let's do a couple entertainment topics. How about a giant IMAX movie theater down in Douglas County?
Yes, that's the latest plan for a giant movie screen theater. Would be down south of the Park Meadows Shopping Center that's going to open in August.
And they're expecting something like 650,000 people to go to this one theater per year?
That's what they say, and it's interesting that they did an internal study at the Natural History Museum where the IMAX is located right now, and they found only 3% of the Douglas County residents are going to the museum IMAX. So they hope that by having one in Douglas County, it'll really increase the awareness of the IMAX.
Planet Hollywood, something about a liquor license. It didn't work.
That's right. Well, it's a very short-lived story. Monday night, Mayor Wellington Webb met with a bunch of angry Lodo residents who, some of them suggested, we got too many liquor licenses down here, let's have a moratorium. And what was the lightning rod for this was this Planet Lodo. And on Thursday, Beth McCann ruled that they can't have a liquor license. And so they're not going to have a liquor license. But the moratorium itself has died too. That would be illegal because they're state licenses that are issued locally. So the city can't say, you know, that we'll cap the number of liquor licenses downtown.
John Rebchook, the paraboloid is gone.
That's right. It's history. It's out of here. It's been torn down and it's going to be replaced with an elegant box. And we can. A lot of people aren't exactly waiting with bated breaths to see what that looks like. A lot of people don't like the design, and they think that this IMPay design it's been a shame that it was torn down. Others say, look, it was a vacant eyesore that had long outlived its purpose.
And I'm going to reach back on you. A few weeks ago, you did a story, since you were last on the broadcast, about how United Airlines is going to expand its training facilities, not at DIA, but at Stapleton.
Right. They're already at Stapleton, and if you have about 300,000 square feet there for this huge facility, and they're going to spend another $100 million or so expanding it by about a third, adding another 100,000 square feet there. And it'll employ thousands of people, and it'll really help that area too, because you'll have pilots coming through there who will stay at the hotels, which are suffering since since Stapleton closed.
And finally, there is this area in the downtown area just south of Colfax along Spear Boulevard called the Golden Triangle. It's been rusty and other things during the last few decades.
That's right. In fact, we're sitting in the Golden Triangle right now. This is the Golden Triangle. It's an area that people are hoping, the developers there, especially Bruce Berger, who's the main landowner there, they're hoping it's going to be the next Lodo or even surpassing Lodo. And they think that the new Denver Public Library could be a bigger catalyst than Coors Field.
At one time, there was a big push to get the convention center in the Golden Triangle. It fell.
That's actually how it got its name, most people think. It was because they saw gold in this land out here, and it didn't happen.
Chris Lopez.
John, what do you think the chances are that people will want to live in the Golden Triangle when you look at traffic along Broadway and the other thoroughfares in there? Which is a little bit away from downtown Denver.
Right, and the Golden Triangle really crosses into several neighborhoods, and they all have their different characters. The area around Broadway will primarily be more office and commercial and retail use, and then you get more into the interior where you'll have the lofts being built. So the loft projects have been built so far in Golden Triangle have done very well. Berger and his Metropolitan lofts are selling an average of 1.5 a week. He'll be probably all sold out before it opens this fall. And one of the big things is I think that's attracting people there is they think, gosh, I can get in on the ground floor of the Golden Triangle. Well, I can't do that in Lodo anymore.
Is that housing more affordable than the
Yeah.
lofts in the Lodo area?
Well, it's a lot more affordable. It's but still expensive, really. It's $135 per square foot, and you're pushing $200 per square foot for most lofts in Lodo. But then you can buy a house in Highlands Ranch for $85 per square foot.
So what you're essentially saying is that a house couldn't be built in the area because just too expensive.
No. I mean, it could if somebody wanted to spend a lot of money, but you're certainly not going to have any mass production of it. It would have to be an individual who wanted to do it, and that's unlikely.
Bruce Berger, in a line or two, is a leader, not a follower?
Yes, he's a leader. He came in here, he bought this land from a public service company which had planned this huge second downtown here, and that didn't happen, and he got it at such a good price that if he wanted, he could just sit in the land and pay for his debt with the revenue from the existing businesses here.
John Rebchook, real estate editor, Rocky Mountain News. That's our broadcast for this week. For my colleagues, I'm Don Kenny. Have a good weekend.
Funding for the state of Colorado is provided by the Adolph Coors Foundation, the Monfort Charitable Foundation, and the investment firm of Piper Jaffray and its employees, looking toward the future since 1895. The State of Colorado, now in its 18th year, is produced in cooperation with Rocky Mountain Reflections. The State of Colorado provides background on issues of this week, Friday at 7:30, Sunday at 2.